This is Rachel with the Otago Prattville Public Library, and I'm here today to show you how to make seed cards. So seed cards are basically using some paper making techniques to recycle or upcycle paper into a little gift card or postcard or whatever that you can give to someone, and they can plant the card or a part of the card and it will grow into a plant. So today we've got a tray like I'm showing you here, just to collect our excess water and whatnot. We're going to use tomato and basil seeds. We're going to use about 3 cups of water, about 1.5 sheets of scrap paper, and then that blue tissue paper there is about 1/4 sheet of tissue paper, and you can use whatever color you like. I've also got some wooden frames that I got very cheap from a crafting store. They're very thin and they just have a paper backing instead of like a glass frame backing or finish to it. We've also got a food processor or blender that we'll be using. If you have one of these that you can dedicate just to craft projects, I highly recommend doing so with this so that you don't have to cross-contaminate between crafts and food. Paper making can be a little bit icky, especially if you're using upcycling paper that has ink and stuff like that in it. You don't want to be eating any of that. Along with the cheap frame, on top of one of the cheap frames, I have some cheesecloth, and that has been folded over about 4 times, so it's 4 layers of cheesecloth, and I've got probably about 3 yards of it that I'm going to use today, just kind of as both as the screen for the frame, but also as sort of a fabric to mop up some of the excess water. I'm wearing an apron. I highly recommend having an apron and having something on your work surface to help keep it clean, like a piece of newspaper. You can add starch to your pulp mixture, which is what our torn up paper and water is going to be made into. That makes it a little bit easier to write on if you're using a really liquidy ink. It makes it a little bit easier to write on it without the ink bleeding. However, I've found that I've had just as much success without using starch. And if you do use starch, you'll just want to use maybe a tablespoon. And then I've also got an iron and an ironing board. For now, we're going to stick all of our paper and tissue paper. You can use whatever color of tissue paper you would like. And we're going to use all of that paper and stick it into our food processor. Do be careful of the blades. Make sure that you follow all safety strategy when you are using cooking implements and things like that. And then here goes the water. I'm going to add about 1.5 cups to start, and then throughout the blending process I'll add the other 1.5 cups, kind of about halfway through. You can also pre-soak the water to get a smoother blend, but that is up to you. It's up to how much time you have. I went ahead and just stuck the paper in there dry and poured some water on top of it. I gave it a little shake just to get it a little bit more solidified down in the bottom there so it would blend nicely. And then I commenced the blending. So here's our paper, and here is it about to get pulverized. And I started by pulsing with my little food processor, and that kind of got the ball rolling, but it was mostly moving around in clumps, so I switched to puree and pretty much left it on there for the rest of the time. I blended this for about 3 minutes. I'm not going to show you the whole long process of it, but about halfway through I added the rest of the water, and you can see it's starting to chop up some of the bits of paper into smaller bits and whatnot. And this water paper mixture is called pulp, and that will be what we are using to create our new paper for our card. So as you can see, since I used white scrap paper and the pretty blue tissue paper, it's kind of creating this nice sky blue color, a little bit pastel-ish, and I think that's going to turn out nicely in the cards. Of course, I will put pictures of the cards. Here it is with more of the water. I'll put pictures of the cards at the end of the video so you can scope it out. So we're blending, blending, blending. Make sure you get it nice and smooth. And then we're going to assemble our Decalin frame. So that's basically a fancy term for like fancy frames and screens and setups that you can get for paper making online. If you just Google paper making kit and you buy that, you'll get a decal and a frame and a screen and all that good stuff. This is the DIY super cheap version. So I'm using my cheesecloth and I'm kind of stretching it over the back of the frame, pardon me, so that it peeks through to the front. And I'm using that little structural piece of paper that's there where a photo would go to help provide a little bit of structure so that the cheesecloth doesn't sag. If you're using an actual screen, like a metal screen or mesh or something like that, you may not need that extra reinforcement. But since I'm just using cheesecloth here, it was very helpful. And then I kind of tugged all around the edge of the frame to get the cheesecloth to have some surface tension, to have it be a little bit more evenly distributed throughout the frame. So that's what I'm doing out of screen here. And that looks pretty good. I'm just going to tighten it up a little bit more. And then we'll set it in our little tray so that we can begin pouring our mixture over. Okay, so that's one frame set and ready to go. And then here I'm going to set up my other one. And I'm doing the exact same thing for both. So I'm making 2 pieces of upcycled seed paper here, just because I think it's kind of cute if you're making like a greeting card or something like that to have a little bit of texture on the front of the card and on the inside. So it's going to be kind of a beefy card because this paper is thicker than typical paper. So we're going to use a piece of cardstock to mount them both on. But it should have a really cute homemade effect and make it look really cool. So I'm straightening out the cheesecloth again, making sure that it's got some surface tension, that it's nice and tight over that little sheet of paperboard under there. And I'm arranging them. My tray happens to fit both of my frames, which works out really nicely. So I'm arranging them side by side so that I don't have to have more than one tray. If you don't have a little plastic tray like this, you could use an aluminum baking pan. Really, there are lots of options. A big Tupperware, anything that's kind of wide and shallow should do. And now over the top of the cheesecloth that's situated in the frame that I'm working on now, I'm putting some tomato seeds. And they're itty bitty and they're kind of light in color, so you probably can't really see them from my camera here. But they do in fact grow. I have a tomato plant at home that is growing happily from this very same seed packet. I just didn't use all of the seeds, so I thought I'd save some for work. And these are the basil seed pods. They're going to go in my other one. So let me open that packet up and begin sprinkling those in. So I'm going to go ahead, excuse me. Going to go ahead and situate these seeds just so that they're spread out a little bit more. If they're all in one area, especially with these bigger basil pods, it'll just create a big clump in the card and take away some of that cool paper look. Plus, it's kind of nice when the seeds are spread out randomly. It looks a little bit like a confetti effect. So now we're going to add our pulp to our frames that have been prepared with the seeds and the cheesecloth. So I'm using a little scoop here. I did remove the blade from my food processor. Be sure you remove the blade before you try digging out all the pulp. And I'm just scooping generous amounts of the water, the pulp, the whole 9 yards. Whatever gets in the cup is going to go on there. If there's excess water, that is a-okay, because we're going to do lots of water removal and moisture management in basically the whole rest of this video. So I'm scooping out the pulp and putting it all over. I'm going to go ahead and use this little cup that I'm using to scoop to kind of smush it down and flatten it out a little bit. How much pulp you use is totally up to you. I use a pretty generous amount here because I like a thicker paper. It also makes it a little easier to work with. It makes it sturdier and less likely to tear, have holes, fall apart, that sort of thing. That said, if you want a thinner paper, if you want something that's not quite so robust, you can absolutely do thinner layers. If you do thinner layers, do be sure that your food processing has gotten it just about as smooth as you possibly can, and be sure that you take your time in the drying process. So I'm back with my excess cheesecloth, and I'm going to press it down over the pulp. And as you can see, I've got some water coming up between my fingers, and I'm going to start draining some of that excess water off. So the idea is that I'll get some of this moisture away from the pulp, and what will be left behind will be the paper, the card. We'll slowly start taking away layers of cheesecloth, the frame, the cardstock that's holding the cheesecloth in place, all that good stuff. We're gonna do that slowly as we remove moisture, and that way that helps the integrity of the paper stay kind of all meshed together and happy while we're getting it ready to go, but it also speeds along the drying process. So for me, I didn't have a whole lot of extra time. I went ahead and did as much squeezing out of excess liquid. I did a little bit of ironing as well to get rid of some excess liquid. Always iron over a paper towel or fabric over the paper so that it's protected. You don't want to iron directly on super wet pulp because that will ruin your iron and your paper. And go slow and gentle on the heat if you use an iron. The best way to do it is to sandwich your pulp between a couple of pieces of paper towels or cloth or whatever it is that you have handy. If you are using colored tissue paper, be sure it's a towel that you don't mind getting tinted a different color. And once you've got it kind of wrapped up or sandwiched between decent amount of layers of paper towels or cloth, you can put some heavy books or a brick or something like that on it, set it outside if you want to, let it dry overnight. That's a great way to go. Once you do that, you can remove it from the frame, from the cheesecloth in the frame, and then you would want to kind of repeat the same process. Put fresh paper towels around it and smush it overnight. This is the sped up version, so I did lots of smushing, lots of drying and ironing, basically a lot of smushing. You just want to get as much moisture smushed out as you can, and a little bit of ironing. And my paper is currently still a little damp even, so I'm gonna let it dry overnight before I photograph it, and add it to this video. But just in case you were wondering, there are ways to speed this up a little bit. Generally, the more time you take, the more willing you are to slow down and do it right, the better product you end up getting. It is very tricky to remove the pulp from the actual frame, so take your time with doing that as well. You might have to scrape some of the edges towards the inside. You might have to replace a couple of spots where you might have some tears or some holes that pop up. Do all that while it's nice and wet. Be sure that you have your kind of base layer, be sure that you have your base layer or structure good to go before you try to do any drying, aside from just, like I said, smushing out some moisture. Because if you try to dry it too quickly before making sure you can get it out of the mold in one piece, it's going to be that much harder. So I'm going to let this sit and dry for a moment, and then I'm going to go ahead and show you all my smushing, ironing, heating, demoisturizing process. And I'm going to very kindly speed that up for you all, along with the sitting and drying and waiting, so that you do not have to endure too much of watching paper literally dry. Alright, so you've seen in this one video a variety of my drying techniques: the pressing, the pressing between sheets of fabric, in this case cheesecloth, the ironing, and also the just letting it sit between paper towels. As well as at the very end, after I did all this, I went ahead and took them off the paper towels and I just let them sit in the open to dry on a flat, dry surface. So yeah, thank you for joining me to watch this video. I hope you enjoy. If you do make seed cards, I would love to see pictures of them. I hope you enjoyed watching this craft. I hope you enjoy doing it along if you are able and willing to. I will have listed below this video a link to a document with all of the things you will need. And if you have any questions, please shoot me an email at rparlier@appl.info.